My name is Eliza Ray, and I was born with dirt under my nails and doubt in everyone's eyes. While my brothers were praised for muscles and calloused hands, I was mocked for my slowness, until the day I vowed I'd never let them laugh at me again. If they thought I was weak because I wasn't strong like them, they had no idea what I'd become. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far stories like mine can reach. It was the kind of heat that made the air feel heavy. Central California in July, when the sun doesn't just shine, it punishes. I was 10, elbow deep in a row of strawberries, my knees red from the dust when I dropped my basket. Not on purpose. I just couldn't grip it anymore. My hands were trembling and my shoulders burned from hours bent over. The berries spilled out onto the dry dirt like a warning shot, and then came the laughter. "Oh, look!" Kyle shouted. The snail dropped her shell. Travis, he was only a year older but twice as loud, joined in instantly. "Better crawl back to the porch, Eliza. This field's for workers." They always called me the snail, because I moved slower, because I sweated too fast, because I cried once when I cut my palm on a rusted rake, and I might have gotten over it if it weren't for what my father said next. He stood just a few rows over, arms crossed, watching the whole thing. A shadow of a man with leathery skin, boots older than me, and a voice that rarely rose above tired sarcasm. "She'll never be strong enough for real work," he said flatly, not even bothering to walk over. "Should have left her home with the laundry." That was the part I never forgot, not the basket falling, not the snickering boys, but my father saying it like it was fact, like I wasn't even worth yelling at, just quietly dismissed. I remember looking at my mother then. She stood at the edge of the field with her arms full of folded towels, pretending to be too busy to notice what was happening. She turned away when our eyes met. That burned the worst, because when a father mocks you, it cuts deep. But when your mother pretends not to hear, it tells you there's no one coming to your defense. I don't know what possessed me, but I picked up those strawberries with my bare hands, one by one. Not into the basket. Just clutched them, sticky juice dripping down my forearms, crushing under the pressure of my grip. Every squished berry was a silent scream. And in my head, one thought took root like wildfire. "One day, you're going to wish I was slower." It wasn't revenge yet. It was just rage, shame, confusion. A girl trying to make sense of why her brothers were admired for doing the same work she was punished for. That night, while Kyle and Travis bragged about how many rows they'd finished, I sat on the back steps with my knees hugged to my chest. I had red stains on my shirt and mosquito bites blooming across my ankles. My mother passed by me, muttered, "You shouldn't take things so personally," and disappeared inside. But how can you not take it personally when your worth is treated like a joke? That day didn't end with a fight. I didn't shout back or throw anything. I just sat there. And something changed inside me. I stopped trying to win their approval, and I started planning to outgrow their judgment. After that day in the field, I stopped picking strawberries, not because I refused, but because no one asked me to help again. My father never said it outright. He just handed the baskets to Kyle and Travis every morning and walked past me like I was a screen door in winter. Useless. Unneeded. So I did what any desperate little girl does. I found new ways to be useful. If I couldn't lift crates, I'd lift expectations. If they didn't value my hands, I'd prove the worth of my mind. At first, it was simple things. Cleaning without being told. Cooking with extra care. Scrubbing the porch until it shined like I hoped someone might notice. I rearranged the tools in the shed by size and sharpened the dull ones no one touched. I folded the laundry into perfect rectangles. When Dad grunted that his hammer was finally where it belongs, I smiled, until Kyle piped up, "Maybe the ghost of a real worker fixed it." Cue laughter. Cue me pretending to laugh, too. Sometimes I asked if I could help with the farm's paperwork, simple things like invoices or supply logs. But my father would just say, "That's men's business," and change the subject like I'd asked to grow wings. My brothers got calluses. I got callous remarks. It became a pattern. No matter how much I did, it was never the right kind of work. I once spent an entire day reorganizing the pantry. Labeled everything, lined it up like a grocery store. When my mother saw it, she blinked and said, "We'll see how long that lasts," and walked away. That's when I learned the worst kind of silence isn't anger, it's indifference. They weren't cruel, not in the textbook sense. They fed me, let me sleep under their roof. But love, pride, any sense of, we see you, that part of the house was always locked. And so I worked, not for praise, not anymore, but because something inside me said, if I can just do enough, maybe I'll matter. I became the girl who filled the cracks, who made sure the tools were clean and the cupboards weren't bare. The girl who stayed out of the way when Kyle came in sweaty and smug, throwing his boots on the rug I just mopped. Once I overheard Travis telling a friend, yeah, Eliza's like the backup battery. She runs the house while we do the real work. The real work, that phrase haunted me, because no matter how hard I tried, I was always the extra, the support beam, the filler, never the frame. Even holidays followed that rhythm. The boys got new boots and gloves. I got aprons and cookbooks. When I scored top marks in school, my father barely nodded. But when Travis hit a home run in the county league, they threw a backyard barbecue. And through it all, my mother floated like a ghost in denim. She never praised me, but she never stopped me either. Just kept her eyes on the stove, her hands in the sink, and her voice out of every conversation that could have mattered. Sometimes I wondered if she saw herself in me, or if she just didn't want to. There was one winter evening, cold enough that the pipes creaked, when I sat in the corner of the living room, reading a book on business accounting I'd found in a box of old donations. Kyle was bragging about some machinery he fixed, and Dad said, "You've got hands like mine, son." I looked down at my hands then. They were chapped from soap, not soil, thin but not weak. And in that moment I realized they'd never see me because they never looked past what I was. I wasn't strong. I wasn't fast. I wasn't a son, but I was something else. And the longer they ignored me, the more I became certain of one thing: I wouldn't stay here forever. I didn't know what my future would look like yet, but I knew it would be built, not handed. I'd learn to build it brick by brick, page by page, and someday, when they finally looked up, I wouldn't be in their shadow anymore. I was 17 when I finally found the nerve. Not the kind of bravery that makes headlines, just the quiet, burning kind, the kind that simmers for years until one night you either let it out or you let it kill you. It was a Thursday. Dinner was baked chicken and canned corn. My mother had overcooked the rice again, but no one mentioned it. Kyle and Travis were elbowing each other, arguing over who'd get the keys to the truck on Saturday. My father was carving the meat like he was trying to stab the table. Just another dinner in the Ray house, forks clinking, jokes flying, and me sitting there with a secret too big for my chest. I had spent weeks practicing it in the mirror, whispering it into my pillow, writing it down, then shredding the paper. Because once I said it out loud, it wouldn't belong to me anymore. It would belong to them, and I already knew how they handled delicate things. "I've been thinking," I said, placing my fork down. My voice shook a little. "I want to go to school in Sacramento." The table stilled, not silent, but tense. Like the pause before thunder, Travis didn't even wait. "What, like a cooking school?" "No," I said, heart pounding. "Finance. There's a program at Waverly. I want to study business, agriculture, finance, so I can help with the farm, with planning, investments, long-term strategy." Kyle snorted into his glass of milk. "What, you gonna count beans while we pick them?" I tried to hold my ground. "I've been reading up on agribusiness models our farm could grow with the right financial tools, grants, smarter buying cycles, tax." "Smarter buying cycles," Dad cut in, his knife tapping the plate like a warning. "We've been running this farm since before you were born. It's not numbers that keep it alive, it's sweat." "I know that," I said quickly, "but numbers could make the sweat worth more." I was trembling, not because I doubted myself, but because I already knew it wouldn't matter. Dad leaned back in his chair and gave me the kind of look that scraped the marrow from your bones. "City girl fantasy," he said. "You want to waste time in Sacramento with your head in the clouds, be my guest. But don't expect us to throw a party when it crashes down." "I'm not asking for a party," I said quietly, "just support." "Oh, you'll get support," Kyle muttered, "when you get a real job." And just like that, the laughter returned, not loud, not cruel, just inevitable, like gravity. Travis raised his fork in mock salute. "To Eliza the accountant, may her spreadsheets save the world." I looked at my mother then. She hadn't said a word, just kept peeling the skin off her chicken piece by piece. I opened my mouth to ask, to plead, to something. But before I could speak, she looked up and said, "We're out of butter. I'll pick some up tomorrow." And that was that. My dream died at that dinner table, not because it wasn't real, but because they decided it didn't deserve air. I cleared the dishes that night like I always did, washed them until the water turned cold. My hands went numb, but I barely felt it. Inside, I was already gone. In my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the cracked ceiling. No tears, just silence. The kind that settles in your lungs when the people who should believe in you most treat your ambition like a punchline. That's when I made the decision. Not the kind you shout from rooftops. The kind you whisper to your own reflection, quiet, steady, final, "I'm leaving, with or without them." And one day, they'll wish they had listened. I left 2 weeks after graduation. Quietly. No big speeches. No dramatic suitcase dragged down the porch steps. Just a single packed duffel bag, a folder with my scholarship paperwork, and a one-way bus ticket to Sacramento. The morning I left, Kyle was asleep on the couch, mouth open, remote still in his hand. Travis had taken the truck the night before. My father was already out in the field. And my mother, she stood at the kitchen sink, peeling apples like she had for years. She didn't look up when I said, "I'm going now." Didn't ask where or how or if I had enough to eat. She just said, "You'll need a coat. Sacramento gets cold at night." That was the closest thing I'd get to a blessing, so I took it, slipped on the worn denim jacket she'd hung by the door, and walked out into a world that had never been promised to me. I still remember the way the morning light hit the dust on our gravel road, making it look almost golden, like even the dirt was trying to wish me luck. The bus smelled like stale coffee and mechanical breath, but I didn't care. I sat by the window, forehead pressed to the glass, and watched the fields pass by. It was strange how fast home becomes history when you're finally moving. Sacramento hit me like a different language. Cars that didn't slow down. People who didn't make eye contact. So many voices, none of them mocking mine. I found the apartment from a bulletin board flyer. Studio, cheap, shared bath down the hall. My roommate, Nina, was already there. She was everything I wasn't. Bold, messy, magnetic. A graphic design student who painted on her closet doors and lit candles that smelled like sandalwood and rebellion. "You're the farm girl," she said, grinning as she held out a hand. "I'm the city freak, perfect match." I liked her immediately. Waverly School of Finance wasn't glamorous. A community of sharp-eyed professors and determined students, most of us juggling jobs, rent, and ambition. I spent the first month overwhelmed, sitting in the back of lectures, scribbling notes I barely understood, trying to keep up with concepts that felt as foreign as a second life. I'd never felt smaller until one night. Nina was hunched over her sketchpad, cursing about freelance deadlines, and I was reviewing a cash flow case study. She groaned, flopped onto the floor, and said, If I have to do one more fake project, I'll scream. You know what's real? Bills, rent, grocery lists." I smiled. "Actually, that's kind of all finance is." She raised an eyebrow. "Come again." So I explained it casually but carefully. How income and expenses work like irrigation channels. How fixed costs are like rooted crops and variable costs like seasonal yields. I didn't even realize how fast I was talking, how sure I sounded, until Nina sat up and stared at me like I'd grown wings. "You actually love this stuff," she said. And just like that, I realized I did. All those years balancing meals, calculating supply runs, stretching soap and flour and firewood, I wasn't just surviving. I'd been managing a system, an economy. I had done finance my whole life, I just didn't know it had a name. After that, something inside me snapped into place. I stopped hiding in the back row, started asking questions, visiting professors during office hours, building spreadsheets that actually made people say, "Wait, this is good." And when the first semester grades came back, I was at the top. I taped the report card next to my bed, not for pride, for proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that my dream hadn't been fantasy, that I was finally visible. One night, Nina and I celebrated with $2 cupcakes and dollar store wine. We sat on the floor, legs crisscrossed, laughing at our tiny lives and big dreams. "You know," she said, licking frosting from her thumb, "you're gonna be someone terrifying one day. Like empire-building terrifying." I laughed, but something in me sparked. Not ambition, not yet, just the quiet echo of possibility. I still called home sometimes. My father rarely answered. Kyle and Travis never did. My mother's updates were short, mostly about weather or who stopped by the farm stand. Never once did she ask how I was doing. Never once did she say, "I'm proud of you." But I kept studying anyway, because pride from them was no longer the goal. Success was. Independence was. Someday I'd build something so solid they couldn't laugh it away. And when that day came, they know exactly who I was. It's funny what distance does. At first, it feels like escape, a clean break, a blank page. But then after a while, the silence starts whispering. It starts small, like how the calls home became less frequent. Then the texts stopped. Then birthdays were just "hope you're well" messages with no punctuation. After a while, even those stopped coming. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. That maybe everyone was just busy. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't just missing from their lives, I was being erased from them. The postcards I sent from Sacramento, never mentioned. The Christmas card I mailed with a handwritten note, no reply. When I called on Dad's birthday and Travis answered, he said, "Oh, you still have this number." Still, as if I'd died and no one told me. I poured myself into school instead. Took extra credit projects. Picked up a job at a local co-op grocery store on weekends, helping manage their inventory system. It wasn't glamorous, but it made rent and gave me data to analyze. Patterns, pricing structures, real-world models I could turn into mock investment strategies. It became my secret rebellion. Every time my father praised Kyle or Travis for bringing in profit from the farm, I imagined the spreadsheets they refused to let me build. Every time they posted a new piece of machinery or another freshly painted sign with "Ray Bros Produce" in bold letters, I opened another Excel tab and ran simulations for how they could triple their margins, if only they asked me. They never did. But they were doing fine, it seemed. Too fine. Nina noticed it first. She was scrolling through social media one night when she paused. "Hey, is this your brother's farm?" I leaned over. The photo was one of those sun-drenched, over-filtered posts, a shiny new truck parked in front of the barn. Kyle, grinning like a politician, arms slung around Travis. The caption read, "Hard work pays off, new upgrades rolling in." And there it was, my last name in hashtags, in mentions, in pride, without me. "That's a $60,000 truck," Nina said, frowning. "How are they affording that?" I didn't have an answer, because the Ray farm was never flush with cash. I knew the margins. I had lived the rationed breakfasts and scraped together repairs. Suddenly, they were expanding, buying new equipment, upgrading infrastructure. The kind of moves that made sense if they had a business plan, or at least a financial brain behind them. But they didn't have one, and they sure weren't calling to thank me. So I let it go, told myself maybe they'd figured it out. Maybe the boys had finally taken a business course. Maybe this was just a lucky streak. Until one afternoon, about 8 months before graduation. I was back from class early, juggling an iced coffee and a bag of groceries when my phone buzzed. A missed call from the family line. It had been over a year since I'd heard from that number. I stared at the screen, frozen. Then the voicemail notification blinked. My hand trembled as I pressed play. "Hey, this is just Kyle calling. Guess you're not around. Anyway, Dad said the irrigation system might need replacing. We're thinking of looking into another short-term loan. Travis found a place that offers no interest if paid off in 60 days, but I don't think we'll hit that. Still, he says we should risk it. Business is good, right? Anyway, we got this. Just letting you know, don't worry, everything's fine." Click, just letting me know. They hadn't let me know a single thing in 2 years, and now suddenly I get a call right before they take on a risky loan. I replayed the voicemail twice, then sat down and listened again with my finance brain turned on. And that's when it hit me. The keywords, the phrasing, the panic beneath the casual tone. This wasn't a call to inform me. It was a breadcrumb trail, a hint, a warning disguised as bravado. They were in trouble. And if I knew my brothers, and I did, they were handling it the way they handled everything, with duct tape, denial, and overconfidence. I didn't cry. I didn't call back. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up every article I'd saved about rural loan default trends, and I started building a file. Not for revenge, not even for pride, but because I could feel the storm coming. And this time, I'd be ready. By junior year, I was running 2 lives. By day, I was Eliza Ray, top of the class in agri-finance, managing accounts at my internship like a junior associate. By night, I was still the girl from the strawberry rows, except now she ran complex spreadsheets and coached younger students who whispered, "How do you make this stuff look easy?" It wasn't easy. It never was, but it was mine. I had earned a coveted spot at Sequoia Capital West, a boutique investment firm that specialized in agribusiness portfolios. They liked that I spoke both languages, the numbers and the land. My interviews weren't just polished, they were personal. Because while other interns memorized farming terms, I'd lived them. I'd smelled the rust on broken tractors. I knew what a bad harvest looked like in my mother's face, not just on a chart. And when the firm's senior advisor handed me a file on a struggling walnut co-op, I didn't flinch. I stayed up until 2 a.m. mapping cash flow trends and restructuring their supply chain logic like it was second nature. "You think like a landowner," he said. I wanted to say no. I think like someone who was never allowed to be one. But I just nodded and thanked him. My apartment with Nina had changed too. We were no longer just surviving students, we were women in orbit. She picked up freelance design clients. I brought home numbers that whispered of future empires. And next to my desk, right above the lamp, I pinned a postcard of the Ray family farm. A photo from years ago, taken before the renovations, before the expansion, before I left. It wasn't there for nostalgia. It was there as a reminder, not of home, but of the silence, the names I was called, the nights I scraped my knees on porch steps while they laughed about my soft hands. The postcard reminded me what I was working against, what I was working toward. Sometimes I'd catch Nina looking at it. "You ever gonna visit?" she asked once. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was I wasn't sure I wanted to. It had been 3 years since I left. 3 years without a birthday call. 3 years since I heard my name said with anything but surprise. But I didn't need that anymore, because in the walls of that little Sacramento apartment, I had built a new kind of life, one no one could take from me. One Tuesday afternoon, I sat in a boardroom with 2 senior partners as they reviewed my projections on a citrus export strategy. My blazer didn't feel borrowed anymore. My words didn't sound like borrowed confidence. They sounded like mine. "Who ran these numbers?" one partner asked. I raised my hand. "I did," he smiled. "You've got a sharp mind, Eliza, don't let that go to waste." And something about that line landed deeper than he knew, because I remembered being told I had a city girl fantasy, that my ideas were nice for dinner talk, but real work happened in the field. Well, I was doing real work now, and none of them saw it. They hadn't called after Kyle's voicemail. No follow-up. No apology. No, "Hey, we need your help." Just silence. That kind of silence used to gut me. Now, it just fueled me. I thought it might hit me when they called my name, or when I stepped onto the stage, the bright lights catching on the edge of my pressed navy suit, or maybe when the dean shook my hand and smiled like I was one of her own. But it didn't. The moment that broke me wasn't any of those. It was the row of reserved seats near the front, seats I'd held with quiet hope, seats I imagined my parents might fill, if not both, then maybe just my mother. Seats that stayed empty right through the speeches, right through the applause, right through the clicking of my heels as I walked across the stage alone. I smiled anyway, because I knew the camera was on me, because Nina was in the second row, cheering like it mattered more to her than to anyone, because I had promised myself I wouldn't give them that much power anymore. But inside, it stung. Not like a knife, not like betrayal, just absence, a vacuum where love should have been. I stood on that stage as the announcer read my name, not just as a graduate, but as the head of agri-finance research for Luminvest Capital. It wasn't just a diploma. It was a declaration that I'd made it, that every dirty look, every dismissed idea, every "you're just not built for this" had been wrong, dead wrong. After the ceremony, Nina and I ducked into a cafe off 8th Street, one of those dim, brick-walled places where the espresso hits like a confession. We ordered croissants and toasted with paper cups full of bitter joy. "To freedom," Nina said. "To finally being seen," I added. She leaned in. Do you regret they weren't there? I paused. I used to think I'd fall apart without their approval, I said. But now I think I just wanted them to show up, not clap, not cry, just show up. And they didn't. There was no drama about it, no excuse. No last-minute text or voicemail, just silence. The same silence I'd come to know like an unwanted companion. The kind that follows women who stop asking for permission. I looked around the cafe, students buzzing with post-grad giddiness, families taking photos, dads in wrinkled shirts holding bouquets. No one was holding one for me, but I didn't feel empty. Not really. Because this success, this moment, it wasn't theirs to witness anymore. It was mine. And it had never depended on their eyes to be real. After our coffee, Nina and I walked back through the city. I took the long route home past the Capitol steps where people posed with balloons and degrees. I passed a little girl in a sparkly dress sitting on her dad's shoulders, pointing at the crowd like it was Disneyland. I smiled, not out of envy, out of clarity. Some of us don't get the fairy tale send-off. Some of us have to clap for ourselves. And maybe that's the point. Because when you earn something alone, you never forget the shape of it. Back in my room, I unpinned the postcard of the farm from my wall. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. I just placed it in a drawer, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed it on display to remember why I started. That night, I journaled one sentence before bed. Their absence no longer defines me. My presence does. It happened on a Tuesday. One of those September evenings where Sacramento still pretends it's summer, the air thick with heat and fading light. I was walking up the steps to my apartment, arms full of groceries and a head full of deadlines when I saw him, sitting on the stoop, hands clasped, shoulders hunched, face older than I remembered, my father. At first I froze because part of me thought I was imagining it, that I'd conjured his silhouette like a ghost. But then he looked up and there it was, that same steel gray stare. Weathered skin, the posture of a man who spent a lifetime holding back what he should have said years ago. "Eliza," he said, just my name, no sweetheart. "No, I'm sorry, just Eliza." "What are you doing here?" I asked, every muscle tensing as I set my bag down slowly. He didn't rise, just patted the step beside him like we were meeting for a Sunday picnic. I didn't sit. "We need help," he said finally. There it was, the truth dropped like a stone in still water. Kyle and Travis. Made mistakes, got excited, thought they knew what they were doing. Took out loans they didn't understand, bought equipment they couldn't pay off, and now, he rubbed a hand over his face. "Now we're drowning, Liz." Liz, he hadn't called me that since I was 13, I said nothing. He looked up at me, eyes suddenly glassy. "You were always the smart one, I see that now, you what you've built." I cut him off. "No," I said quietly. "Don't turn this into flattery. You're here because your son's failed and you think I can clean it up." He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He just nodded. And in that moment, something ancient inside me cracked, not in pain, but in power. "You laughed when I said I wanted to study finance," I continued. "You told me it was a fantasy. You mocked me at the dinner table. You let Kyle and Travis call me the snail while I cooked your meals and mopped your floors." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You let me leave that house with nothing but a coat and silence." He opened his mouth, but I wasn't done. "And now that your strong sons broke the system they thought they could handle, you want my brain, my knowledge, my work." I paused, then said the words I'd waited years to deliver. "You don't get to need me only when I'm useful." The wind picked up a little, a dry, rustling breeze like applause through the leaves. He bowed his head. "You're right." I stared at him, stunned. "I didn't see you. Not for what you were. I was proud of the boys because they looked like me. But you had something else, something I didn't understand, and He stopped himself. "I don't deserve your help, but I had to ask." His voice cracked on the last word. That should have softened me, but it didn't, because this wasn't an apology, it was survival. They didn't miss me. They missed the hole I could patch, the fire I could put out. I stepped past him and picked up my groceries. My hands were steady. "I'll think about it," I said. "But if I help, it won't be because I owe you anything." He nodded slowly. "I understand." And then, as I turned the key in the door, I said the final piece. "You always said I wasn't strong enough for real work. Funny, now you're sitting on my doorstep because you broke the real work." I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't cry. I just walked into my apartment, set down the bags, and exhaled like a woman who had finally taken back every piece of herself. I wasn't the snail anymore. I was the storm they never saw coming. I didn't go home that weekend. Instead, I went to work. The next morning, I walked into Luminvest Capital with a straight back and a sharper resolve. I didn't carry a childhood grudge or a bleeding heart. I carried a proposal. 3 years ago, I had left the Ray family farm with nothing but a bus ticket and a plan. Now I returned with an acquisition model. I opened a new folder in our firm's agri-portfolio files, titled it Ray Bros Produce Assessment and Restructure. Not my family's farm. Not the place that broke me. Just a name. A business. That was how I wanted it. That's how it needed to be. I spent 3 days pulling every public record I could find. Property liens, debt histories, purchase orders. Their books were a mess, scattered, over-leveraged, bloated with short-term loans and reckless expansions. They built a house of cards and spray-painted it to look like a barn. But buried underneath all the ego and bad math, there was still value. Good land. Prime location. A customer base built over decades. They didn't need to be destroyed. They needed to be managed. That's what I pitched. In the glass-paneled conference room on the 12th floor, I stood before 2 partners, a senior associate and a whiteboard full of numbers that most people would have overlooked. But not me, because I knew that farm better than anyone. Not just the soil, but the rot. Not just the fields, but the blind spots. I believe this operation has potential, I said. Under new leadership, we can restore profitability within 18 months. Whose leadership? One partner asked. I didn't blink. Mine. They raised eyebrows, but no one argued. My track record spoke louder than my age, and my voice, it didn't shake. We'd buy the majority stake, I continued. Rebrand under the Luminvest umbrella. I'll oversee restructuring, on-site visits, new systems, outsourced logistics. No more cowboy economics, just discipline. And the current owners, they'll stay on as salaried employees with oversight. That word, oversight, tasted sweet. Approval wasn't mine to chase anymore. But authority, that I had earned. The proposal passed the initial review. I was authorized to begin negotiations. But this time, I wasn't returning as a daughter. I was returning as a representative of Luminvest Capital, a firm that didn't care who my brothers were or how many times they mocked my dream. All it cared about was results, just like me. That weekend, I drove down to the Central Valley, not to visit, not to explain, but to deliver the first formal packet. When I pulled up to the farm, it looked smaller, not just in size, but in weight. Like the myth of it had finally shrunk down to its real shape. Kyle came out first. Travis followed. Their faces were tight, like pride pressed against panic. My father stepped onto the porch slowly, holding the envelope I'd sent ahead. I read it, he said. I nodded. And it's professional. It's final, I replied. You're free to decline, but the bank won't wait long. Kyle muttered something under his breath. I looked him dead in the eye. You made choices, I said calmly. I'm offering a lifeline, not forgiveness. Travis shifted his weight. So we just work for you now? No, I said. You work for the firm, but I manage the operation. Silence. No shouting, no storming off. Just 3 men realizing the only person they never believed in was now their only chance of staying afloat. It should have felt triumphant. It didn't. It felt necessary, like cleaning up someone else's mess because no one else would. I handed them the formal documents outlining transition phases, personnel reassignment, and compliance standards. I suggest you read it carefully, I said, turning to leave. This is business now, not family. And for once, they didn't argue. Back in my car, I exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but out of reclamation. They thought I was the backup battery, the soft girl with soft dreams. They never saw I was the one holding the generator. 3 months later, the deal closed. Luminvest Capital officially acquired a majority stake in Ray Bros Produce, now rebranded as Ray Valley Agri Co., a name chosen to honor the land, not the last name. I didn't ask for their permission. I didn't need it. The paperwork was clean. The transfer of management went through without drama, mostly because they had no leverage left. Every signature was quiet, every meeting clipped and professional. But one thing still needed to happen. A conversation that had never been allowed to happen in our living room. A reckoning not held under the porch light or at the kitchen table. This time, it would happen in my office. I scheduled the meeting like I would for any clients, sent an official invitation, booked the Sacramento headquarters conference room. I even had nameplates made, not because I wanted to impress them, because I wanted them to understand this was real. No dusty chairs, no faded flannel, no power imbalances leaning in their favor. Here I was the snail. I was the executive director overseeing the restructuring of their business. They arrived 10 minutes early. I watched them through the glass, my father in a too-large suit jacket, Kyle fidgeting with his phone, Travis refusing to meet anyone's eyes. I walked in last. Every heel click against the marble floor echoed like punctuation on a sentence I'd waited a decade to finish. "Thank you for coming," I said, setting my notes down at the head of the table. No one spoke. I glanced at them, 3 men who had once made me feel so small, now looking slightly stunned to be in a room they didn't control. "Today's meeting is to walk through the new management structure for Ray Valley Agri-Co," I continued, my voice steady. "There are 3 goals: stabilize the operation, increase yield within sustainable cost margins, and restore community trust." Travis finally spoke. "People talkin'." I looked at him. "You borrowed $500,000 in equipment loans and missed 2 payment cycles. Yes, Travis, people are talking." He went quiet. I moved through the agenda, consultant schedules, payroll transitions, inventory audits. Kyle tried to interject with a question about the loan payoff plan, but I cut him off with a glance. "This isn't a negotiation, this is an orientation." And then I said the words I dreamed of saying, "This is your second chance, don't waste it." I let the silence sit. My father folded his hands. His knuckles looked older, more brittle than I remembered. When he finally looked up, something had shifted behind his eyes. Not pride, not regret, just truth. "You've done well, Eliza," he said quietly. "We didn't think you had it in you, that was our mistake." Not an apology, but a step. Kyle nodded stiffly. "The way you talk in here, it's like a different person." "No," I said. "This is who I've always been, you just never listened long enough to hear her." They left after the meeting, no hugs, no long goodbyes, just nods, quiet acknowledgments, and for once no jokes. I stood by the window after they left, looking down as they crossed the parking lot. 3 figures shrinking under the wide Sacramento sun. For years, I thought I wanted revenge. But standing there, all I felt was closure, because I hadn't humiliated them. I hadn't needed to, I had just succeeded. And success, when done right, is the loudest silence there is. The conference room was quiet after they left, still, sterile, and full of echoes. I stood there for a long time, not thinking, not feeling, just being, absorbing the aftershock of what had just happened. I had faced them, not as their daughter, not as the girl they once laughed out of the dinner table, but as their superior. And they hadn't argued, they hadn't mocked. They hadn't rolled their eyes or cracked jokes or looked to my father for the real answer. They'd listened. It wasn't vindication, it was something softer and somehow deeper. I turned to gather my files, already halfway back into work mode, when I heard the door creak open behind me. I turned. It was my father, alone. He stepped back into the room, hat in hand, as if unsure whether he was allowed back inside. For a second we just stared at each other, and then he spoke. "You were never weak," he said, just like that, no preamble, no apology bouquet, just those 5 words, "You were never weak." My hands froze on the folder. He took another step forward. "We just didn't see you." There it was. The sentence I'd waited most of my life to hear. The one I'd stopped hoping for years ago, when I realized that hoping for their approval was like planting seeds in salt. And now here it was, gently spoken but earthquake-heavy. "I thought strength was about arms and sweat and long hours," he continued, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "But you held things together with your mind, with your will." He looked around the room. "This place, this is yours, isn't it?" I nodded, not proudly, just honestly. He smiled, eyes suddenly wet. "I thought if you left, you'd forget us, that you'd throw the whole life away, but you didn't. You turned around and helped the very people who pushed you out." He took a breath. "That's strength, Liz. That's more than I ever taught your brothers or myself." I didn't cry, but something inside me shifted. Years of weight, not all gone, but lighter. Because it wasn't just what he said. It was the way he said it, like he finally meant it. like he finally saw me. Kyle and Travis stepped back in then, just behind him. They must have been waiting outside, unsure if they were welcome for whatever was unfolding. Kyle scratched the back of his neck. Hey, I know we gave you a hard time back then. Thought we were just messing around, but he looked up, eyes direct. We were wrong. Travis, for once, didn't speak, just nodded, slow and steady. They didn't cry. They didn't beg. They just surrendered, not to me, to the truth, that I had become something none of them had expected, and that I didn't need their permission anymore to shine. But here they were, giving it anyway. I didn't forgive them in that moment, but I let go of needing to be angry, because their respect. I didn't chase it anymore, I simply earned it. And in that space between what I had become and what they had finally seen, I found something I didn't know I still wanted. Peace. The next time I stood on the farm, it was on my terms. No strawberry baskets. No calloused hands dragging me behind. No laughter in the distance calling me slow. Just the wind, the sun, and the soft hum of machinery I had approved. Ray Valley Agrico was no longer running like a family experiment. It was a business now. Structured, audited, and finally productive. Under my direction, we'd brought in consultants from the university extension program, introduced financial software to track expenses in real time, streamlined supply chains, diversified crops based on seasonal market trends. Every decision had a model behind it. Every dollar had a purpose. And the results? They were undeniable. In just 2 quarters, productivity was up by 28%, costs down by 14%. Local partners started calling again, some even offering premium contracts based on projected stability. But the biggest change wasn't in the numbers. It was in the eyes of the people who worked there. The seasonal staff, the same ones who used to whisper behind my back or ignore me altogether, now greeted me with nods of respect. I was the girl from the big city anymore. I was Ms. Ray. Even Kyle had adapted. He managed inventory now, using the new system we trained him on. Travis worked with the field techs, coordinating crop rotation with input from our consultants. And my father, he came to meetings on time, sat quietly, took notes. And once, during a presentation on equipment leasing benefits, he leaned over and whispered, "Smart move, Liz, would have never thought of that." That whisper stayed with me longer than any speech, because now I was leading without needing to demand it. One afternoon, I visited the far edge of the land, the spot where I used to get sent during harvest, furthest from the others because I was too slow to be useful. I stood there in silence, watching the new irrigation system hiss quietly to life, watching rows of late-season greens flutter in the wind, watching 2 new hires walk by with tablets recording data I had taught them to collect. This was no longer the field of my humiliation. It was a field of proof. Proof that I could build, that I could lead, that I could take the very ground that once tried to bury me and make it bloom under my terms. I didn't live on the farm anymore. I didn't need to. My life remained in the city, my office, my future, my independence. But I visited monthly now, not out of obligation, out of purpose. Each visit they listened closer, worked harder, resisted less, trusted more. And every time I drove back toward Sacramento, the rearview mirror showed a farm that no longer laughed at me. It listened. It respected. It followed. And I couldn't help but think maybe this was what real victory looked like. Not applause, not revenge, just quiet influence. The kind that changes everything without ever needing to say, "I told you so." 10 years later, I stood on a very different stage. Not a graduation podium, not a conference room, not a courtroom of redemption. This one had lights, cameras, a mic clipped to my collar, a backdrop that read, "National Agri-Finance Conference, Building Futures from the Ground Up." And in front of me, hundreds of faces, students, investors, professors, dreamers. I took a breath, not because I was nervous, because I knew how far this breath had traveled. "I'm Eliza Ray," I began, voice even, eyes steady. "Senior partner at Luminvest Capital, and once upon a time I was a girl picking strawberries at the edge of a field while her brothers laughed and her father told her she wasn't strong enough for real work." Silence. Not heavy, not hostile, just hooked. I went on. "I used to think strength was measured in how much you could lift, how fast you could finish, how loud your voice was in a room. But over time, I learned it's in how long you can carry silence, how long you can wait for someone to see your worth, how long you can keep going even when no one claps. I told them everything, not the dirt and drama, just the truth. How I went to school on a scholarship, how I rose through the ranks, how I returned to a failing farm, not to fix it out of pity, but to finally manage it on my terms. How I turned the land that once mocked me into one of our firm's most consistent performers. And now, I said, I mentor rural students who want to do the same because I know how lonely it feels to want something your community says you're not meant for. The applause was real, loud, long, standing. But it wasn't that made me pause mid-bow. It was the figure at the back of the room. She wasn't standing. She wasn't clapping like the others, just sitting, hands folded, eyes wet. My mother, we hadn't spoken in nearly 7 years. No calls, no letters, just mutual silence. But there she was, not dressed for the city, not trying to blend in, just present. The way I once begged her to be, I looked at her and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt recognition. Because maybe she hadn't been silent out of indifference. Maybe she was surviving too. And maybe showing up now here like this was her version of applause. Afterward, I found her near the exit. She didn't speak at first, just handed me something. A laminated recipe card, faded, smudged, one I'd written at age 12. Labeled, "Eliza's farm budget plan, don't laugh." I laughed anyway, she smiled. I didn't keep much, but I kept that. And with that, she walked away. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't make promises, but she saw me, just once, just clearly, and sometimes that's enough. That night, I sat in my hotel room overlooking the city, journal open, pen hovering over the last page. And I wrote, "Sometimes the weakest child in the field is the strongest in the storm." That quote became the closing line of my keynote. It also became my firm's mentorship slogan. It lived on brochures, websites, scholarships. But more than that, it lived in the girls who found me after every speech, wide-eyed, hungry, hurting, and asked, "How did you do it?" And I'd always say the same thing. I stopped waiting for them to clap, and I started building my own stage. Did this story remind you of your own? Whether you're still in the storm or finally standing strong, I'd love to hear your journey. Drop a comment. And if Eliza's story meant something to you, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs it, and remember, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to last.